Hello and welcome to the News Unlocked, the show that takes you behind the headlines to the real stories that matter. A recent study conducted has shown that air pollution contributes to 6.7 million annual deaths globally in 2019. India faced 1.67 million deaths. Now, as North India is waking up to another season of smoggy air with toxic PM 2.5 levels in each breath, we're focusing on pollution, both in the air and also in water that's poisoning Indians slowly. We're going to look at the polluted air in and around the national capital, but we're also going to be looking at what is also becoming a challenge, sea pollution and a haze that's spreading from Mumbai across the west and southern coast of the country. We'll try and find out what really are our solutions. As the US president claims that India's air is filthy, how really bad is it? Let's start by looking at North India's toxic air.
India's capital has been waking up to this hazy view every day for over a week now. But the view isn't new. This was 2019 and 2018 and 2017. It is, after all, that time of the year. According to the Central Pollution Control Board, Delhi's overall air quality is in very poor category. And areas like Anand Vihar, Manduka, Wazirpur and Alipur have recorded worse. The air quality in these areas have periodically dipped to the severe category. And Delhiites are back grappling with the same issue. An issue that the governments, both at the centre and state, have struggled to address through long-term policy plans. But it isn't just the capital. The air is a toxic concoction across northern India, and government agencies say that the air quality will dip further in days to come. And like every year, with rising PM 2.5 levels, comes the blame game rising from stubble burning. The Ministry of Earth Sciences Air Quality Monitor suffers data suggests that more than 1,000 farm fires were spotted on 23rd October in neighbouring states, and the numbers just rose higher on 25th October. India Today found farm fires continue to singe fields in Punjab, despite the state government pledging to compensate farmers who are forced to burn their stubble.
ये तो सब इनकी बातें हैं, ये तो कहते हैं कि पराली को आग लगाना हटा दें। कैसे हटाने, कोई पैसा तो कोई देता नहीं है। अभी कोई हमारे पास हल ही नहीं है आग लगाने के अलावा।
With government compensation still on drawing boards, Punjab farmers have gone ahead and taken the easy route. Some are even offering money to the government to lighten their burden.
ਜੇ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ 5000 ਰੁਪਇਆ ਕਿੱਲਾ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਦੇਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ। ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਣਕ ਬੀਜ ਦੇਵੇ ਇਕਣੀ ਪਰਾਲੀ ਚ ਬੀਜ ਦੇਵੇ 5000 ਰੁਪਇਆ ਕਿੱਲਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੱਟ ਲਵੇ, ਸਟੈਟੀ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਕੱਟ ਲਵੇ, ਬੈਂਕ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਕੱਟ ਲਵੇ, ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ 50% ਸਬਸਿਡੀ ਦੇਵੇ। ਜੇ ਮੰਨ ਲਓ ਅਸੀਂ 1 ਕਿੱਲੇ ਤੇ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਖਰਚਾ ਕਰੀਏ ਸਾਤੋਂ 5000 ਚ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਦਾ।
Estimates say that there has been a 280% rise in stubble burning. The situation is particularly grim in Punjab, which produces half of 40 million tonne generated every year.
Let's first, therefore, examine the immediate solutions that the government is proposing to try and improve the quality of air that we breathe in North India. Karthik Ganesan is joining us. He is fellow at CEW. He joins us. I'm also joined by Siddharth Singh. He is the author of a book the great smog of India. He's an energy and climate policy researcher. I appreciate both of you joining us. Let's turn to what the government is proposing and what they told the Supreme Court yesterday, Karthik, because the government says we are coming out with a comprehensive legislation on air quality management in the National Capital Region and adjoining areas. Do you believe that a tough, strict law is what we need to improve the quality of air?
Rajiv, absolutely. There is definitely a need for a law that states clearly what the intention. And I think there have been many efforts made in the past, but what has not happened is the government has not lived through on the resources that are needed to implement any such law. And in this particular case, right, I mean, we've been saying it out aloud, and a lot of civil society groups have been talking about it. I think blaming the farmers is perhaps the wrong thing to do. And if you look at the core of it, the engagement of the farmers starts with what's called the agricultural extension system. And any change that you need to bring up really means that the agricultural extension system needs to be strengthened. And what has really happened is ever since, we got all the technology through to them for increasing productivity, what we've not done is, as we've asked them to sort of change and adapt to the times, that extension system has become weak. And enabling them to sort of think beyond rice wheat cropping, think about other ways of cropping itself, right? Whether it is, using of this happy seeder or any other mechanism, is completely missing. And you need to put money into those systems.
No, but why? But my limited point, Karthik, is why blame the farmer? Let's be very clear. Vehicular pollution is perhaps far more damaging to the quality of air that we breathe today than the farmer of Punjab or Haryana. Every year we blame the farmer as if stubble burning is the sole reason. Let's be clear. Also on laws, let's be very clear. There's already an Air Prevention and Control Pollution Act 1981. There's an Environment Protection Act 1986. You don't enforce existing laws. The government says we'll come up with a new legislation. A, why blame the farmers? And B, is a law the solution?
Absolutely. So all of these laws, so the pollution control boards and all of them have really been set up to monitor what was, legacy polluters, right? Legacy polluters are industries. So the role of all of these pollution control bodies was to really monitor what were industries doing. But in today's times, the sources of pollution are multifarious. You've got vehicular pollution in cities, you've got construction and demolition dust, you've got resuspented dust from, transport moving around, you've got stuff that gets blown in. Right? There's household air pollution arising from solid fuel use all around, the areas around the NCR, the rural areas. So the problem is the Pollution Control Board, that legacy entity, has very little say in the way each one of these sources behaves. They, at best, have the ability to monitor industrial stacks, right? Which is your power plants and perhaps some of your, industries that are dotting the landscape here, which are also significant. But they have no control over any of the other items. And more importantly, they don't have the resources to even address what was in their remit.
Siddharth Singh, let's be clear. The worry is that this is an annual problem. And the worry is that the government now, when faced by a court order, comes and says, look, we'll bring in a new law. We'll bring a comprehensive legislation. I know that there are countries like the US Clean Air Act, which empowers the federal agencies to take action against those who are violators. Do you believe that can happen in India? Can you really act against violators?
Rajdeep, I would say, unfortunately, we do not have the capacity and the skills needed at the ground level to actually take action on the problem. So I think you're right that on paper, we may have the necessary laws, we may have the necessary regulations, such as the Air Act and so on. However, when it comes to actual implementation, our state pollution control boards are absolutely in shambles. I've been speaking with a few state pollution control board officials, and the state of play for them, is actually very worrisome. For example, we have situations where engineers who have no background in law are expected to write the first legal paperwork to take action against any polluters. Naturally, these laws and these cases end up being lost, or they end up being rejected at the first count, because obviously an engineer will not be able to do something like that. Secondly, they are overburdened and completely spread thin. They're not allowed any specialization. So one day they may be expected to be, working on something like auditing an industry. The other day they'd be running around doing bureaucratic duties. And in the case of the Haryana Pollution Control Board, they even have, responsibilities that have nothing to do with air pollution. For example, poultry farms are under their ambit. Now they're already stress thin. What are they doing with, worrying about chicken production? So these are the kind of problems that we have at the ground level. So until we address that, until we provide them the necessary resources, we don't even have budgetary allocations for these pollution control boards. They earn their revenues out of selling certificates to industry. So until we really solve that problem, these laws by themselves will not be enough.
So are you saying, therefore, what you are saying is you need legislation, but you also need an enabling environment which allows the state pollution boards to actually effectively act on the legislative powers that they are provided. Am I correct? That you actually need to start giving primacy and specialization to state pollution boards to act against violators?
Absolutely correct. We need, the necessary training. We need to ensure that each pollution control board official is able to be at the same posting for some time, that they're able to work with the stakeholders. It's not a you versus them mentality that we have. I think, one of the things that, you had kind of mentioned earlier, that is this a question of blaming the farmers? I don't think it's a question of blaming anyone. Most polluters in the country, be it in the form of truck drivers, be it anyone who's using biomass to burn to get heat in the peak of the winters, they're not polluting because they're malicious in nature. They're polluting because we have no alternatives. Unless we're able to work with these stakeholders to provide alternatives, to provide pathways to transition to better, cleaner fuels, we will not be able to really address the problem.
Karthik, the fact is, though, that the Supreme Court in the past has at times been successful. To some extent, some of the green tribunals have been successful. It was the Supreme Court, for example, that ensured that a greener fuel, CNG, was implemented in Delhi-NCR region almost now 20 years ago. So do you believe that proactive legislation or proactive, a proactive Supreme Court and a green tribunal system is actually going to raise consciousness? Do you see that happening at all? Do you see any change at all?
So I think the saving grace over the last few years, right, has definitely been this proactive judiciary that's really pulled up the executive and everybody at who's in charge of implementing all these policies. But what has really happened is that with this executive being devoid of the resources needed, it's become a bit of a joke in the sense that, every now and then the chief secretaries of all the states get pulled up for not implementing, for example, the directives of the NGT or the Supreme Court. But at the end of the day, everybody knows that the money to pay the farmers, whether it's the 100 rupees per quintal or 2,000 rupees per acre, none of it is there with the states. So aren't each of these people actually in contempt of a court order? What is being done? Obviously, you can't put them behind bars for it because the court knows that the wherewithal doesn't exist within the financial system that they operate in, right, to actually follow through on what the court says. At the same time, the court has also been sort of found wanting in its technical understanding of the issue. For instance, the smog towers that the court has basically been prescribing, right? It is such a ludicrous solution to the problem. But the fact is that the government of Delhi, under pressure from the Supreme Court, has had to commit 20 crores of precious resources to get this thing built in the next 10 months, where no university across the country is actually willing to touch it with a barge pole, saying that I don't understand the science behind it. It's vague at best. But yet, the activism on the Supreme Court, unfortunately, also pushes unscientific solutions for the problem. Right? I don't want to digress into that area, but unfortunately, I think beyond a point, the activism on part of the court doesn't really help. I think the executive and the legislature need to take the advice of scientists who understand the issue very well and put the money where the mouth is and ensure that those sources of pollutions are addressed and in the manner that Siddharth has already spoken about.
Let me turn for a moment and press the pause button and move from air pollution to a problem that often isn't focused upon enough. We're not just finding air pollution in North India. What we're also finding is growing sea pollution and a haze that's now spreading across the coastal areas of the country. 13 Indian states and union territories along the Indian coastline are now finding that the quality of air is declining. Take a look.
The smog may be covering skies up north, but running to the sea is not an option because there one faces a different pollutant. Coastal cities like Mumbai may have comparatively better air quality, but look at what India's financial capital has to struggle with when it comes to pollution. 60% of Mumbai's population lives close to the coast, and many say this is the reason for the city's filthy shores. Plastic and solid garbage finds itself near the sea instead of dump yards and is visible. But there's another invisible enemy that is choking the coast.
Sanitation system of our city, I mean, it's around 100 plus years old, British times. I mean, so we have two drainage system. One is sewage and one is stormwater drain. Sewage goes around 2.5 kilometers or 2 kilometers away from the shore. I've seen, I mean, increased amount of pollution, like the color of water. Here also you can see the color of water is gray, brown, formation of algae, lots of muck.
Around 25% of sewage generated in the city comes from slums and flows straight into nallas and creeks, polluting the marine ecosystem. The remaining 75% waste enters the 1,915 kilometer sewer network and is treated before it's released into the sea. Of the existing sewage treatment plants, only a few meet the norms set up by the National Green Tribunal. According to studies and reports, water contamination and toxicity levels at some of the most popular beaches like Juhu and Versova were found to be in the red zone. That is, contaminated to alarming levels of toxicity.
Joining our panel is Afroz Shah, lawyer and environmental activist from Mumbai, who's been one of those who's been involved in the cleaning of Mumbai's beaches. Importantly, Afroz, thanks very much for joining me. When I look at the problem, water bodies being polluted by untreated effluent sewage that is being dumped into them across the country, 86 water bodies critically polluted, having a chemical oxygen demand or concentration of more than 250 mg. Where is the problem? Is there a lack of social consciousness, or is the civic system completely breaking down, where they don't seem to recognize what is happening to seawater, to our beaches?
Rajdeep, it's a combination of various factors. There are bad laws, even bad enforcement, and a complete lack of awareness and action on the part of citizens. It's a combination of all three. So what you see in the beaches of Mumbai or anywhere in the world, it's not confined to India at all. These problems persist everywhere. I've had the opportunity to clean beaches abroad, and you can see it everywhere.
No, but
I always say that plastic pollution begins in the head and it must end in the head.
You know,
So
when
what
you
we
launched
think
your
about the
campaign,
planet,
for
we do.
example, sorry to intervene, when you launched your campaign to try and clean up Mumbai's beaches, did it wake up the municipal body? I know that Aditya Thackeray, the environment minister now of Maharashtra, has supported you, but in general, is there that kind of political consciousness or social consciousness that this should be a priority issue?
Yes, Raj, the problem is huge and everybody wants to change. I have seen my local municipality take steps. We had a tender which had 8 people cleaning 3-kilometer beaches. Now we have a tender where 60, 70 people clean, apart from citizens stepping up. So people want to change. It's only that how do you go about it? Because the narrative is us versus them all the time, Rajdeep. We say that, oh, the government must do that, this one must do that, I will vote, I will pay my taxes, I will chase them. This narrative has created problem for Mother Nature. And for a moment, I'm not saying giving free pass to the politicians. They must be held accountable. At the same time, we citizens who actually buy these products, these packaging, and we litter around, we equally are responsible, and so is the corporate world, and so is the plastic industry. We all must own up and step up. Mother Nature can't take it anymore. And what we did at Versova or what we're doing at River Methi is a perfect example. We need to have many more collaborations, many more partnerships. And we'll have to step up. Taking from your previous debate where you're talking about Pollution Control Board, as a lawyer, I must tell you the Pollution Control Board came from an act which was done in 1974. We are in 21st century. I mean, how do you take that act forward? The Pollution Control Board gives consent to operate, consent to establish to an industry, and the threat is that if you do not comply, we will pull your string. We will shut you down. Now, what about the individuals who are polluting here? They don't have any say. And in fact, the law is so archaic. I find it bizarre that they work as collectors. So if somebody pollutes and they are not able to stop him, so they will acquire his property, they will recover the money. Now, can you, me and you, sit and imagine that somebody will take over slums, somebody will take over buildings, they will auction it because somebody has polluted. So these archaic laws must give way to a fresh set of laws and regulations and rules, which is in tune with 21st century habit, where we have life of convenience, we have these consumer habits, you have your multinationals in your face. So we'll have to have a holistic approach, which is lacking. As I told you, it's a bad law and equally terrible enforcement of law, and the citizens are equally responsible. It's a mess all around.
Let me just widen it therefore to Siddharth Singh once again. Siddharth, do you need a public-private partnership? Afroz is attempting it in the cleaning of the beaches, getting citizens involved, making them conscious. We've seen it in Bangalore. Certain citizens groups got involved in the cleaning of Bangalore's lakes. Do you believe at the end of the day, to make our air cleaner, you're going to have to involve citizen participation? This cannot just be left to the state.
Yes, well, Rajdeep, I think there are aspects of air pollution that can be led by citizen activism. This includes, for example, a point that I had previously made, which is a little underappreciated, especially in a city like Delhi. At the peak of the winters, it's very cold out there, and unfortunately, a lot of people who have to make their livelihoods by being outdoors, they end up having to burn biomass. This includes, wood, cardboards, and all sorts of other things to give them warmth. And I think this is where citizens need to step in as neighborhoods, as resident welfare associations, ensure that we have clean heating for them, to ensure that in pockets where we can work on issues with stakeholders, we are able to ensure that we are not polluting. However, having said that, the larger problem is that this is not just about a small neighborhood or a small city. It's, I think, unlike in the case of, say, beach cleanups and so on, where it's possible to physically go and pick up trash, and of course you still need mechanisms in place. Yes. In the case of air pollution, it's something that spans from Pakistan to West Bengal, in fact all the way into Bangladesh even. How do we get all these stakeholders together? This is where I think it's very important to have an overarching legislation or overarching framework which is headed by somebody right at the top of the administration, who's able to coordinate all these stakeholders to ensure across industries, across sectors, across states, we're all able to work towards the singular goal of cleaning up our air.
Very quickly, Karthik, are things better, you believe, today than they were, let's say, a few years ago? Do you believe there is a greater consciousness on the part of the state and civic society to try and get this problem cracked?
Tough question. I think the noises are being made, certainly, right, about air pollution now. I think they even became close to being electorally important in the Delhi elections. And I think in the state of Bihar, for instance, right, some of the most proactive policies where putting where money where the requirement actually is happening. But the problem also is that the polluting sources have grown, I think, at a much faster pace. So we've not kept pace with the requirements of actually having to mitigate these. I just want to add one point to what Siddharth has said. I mean, as much as, there is probably little in the hands of the average citizen, I mean, we must remember that ultimately, the way Afroz said, a lot depends on our lifestyle choices as well. Right? Whether it is, for instance, the transportation modes that we choose, or whether it's the way we choose to, dump our waste, right? Solid waste, for instance, municipal solid waste, at the end of the day, if not segregated, can be a significant contributor to urban air pollution in many urban centers across the country.
Right.
Because close to about 20-30% probably just gets burnt because it doesn't get picked up. So there's definitely a lot in the hands of the citizen that they can do, but the incentives don't exist for them to actually, sort of go the extra mile to do their part. Right? So whether it is,
Let me leave it there, because I think in a sense you've hit the nub of the problem. We need a more proactive state. We also need a more conscious citizenry. This is going to have to become an issue at the top of the mind before we can actually crack it. And I think maybe in the 21st century, if we recognize that environmental activism is here to stay and can actually play a part in improving the quality of the air we breathe, maybe things will change. I appreciate all my guests joining me here today. As I said, this is the news without the noise. We try and focus on stories that go beyond the headlines. That's why we call it the News Unlocked. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Stay well.